The snow fell in heavy, silent flakes, blanketing the quiet suburban street in a deceptive calm. Inside the house at 47 Maple Lane, the air was anything but peaceful. Eleanor Grayson stood in the living room, her trembling hands clutching the edge of her woolen shawl. At 72, her face bore the lines of a life well-lived loss, and love etched into every wrinkle. Tonight, though, her gray eyes shimmered with something else, disbelief. "Mom, you can't stay here anymore," Michael said, his voice sharp, cutting through the hum of Christmas carols playing faintly from the kitchen. He stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his jaw tight. At 45, Michael was a man of ambition, his tailored suit and polished shoes a testament to years of climbing the corporate ladder. But to Eleanor, he was still the boy who'd once clung to her skirts, begging for one more bedtime story. "Michael," she began, her voice soft but steady, "this is my home too. You know that." He shook his head, his eyes avoiding hers. "No, Mom. This is my house. I've paid for it, worked for it. You've been a burden. I can't keep doing this." The word landed like a blow. A burden. Eleanor felt her chest tighten, the weight of it pressing against her ribs. She'd moved in with Michael and his wife, Laura, 3 years ago after her husband, Tom, passed away. The grief had hollowed her out, but she'd thought living with her son would bring them closer. Instead, it had driven a wedge between them. Laura's cold glances, Michael's growing impatience had all built to this moment. "It's Christmas Eve," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "You're asking me to leave tonight." Michael's face softened for a fleeting moment, but then Laura stepped into the room, her arms folded tightly. "We've arranged a place for you, Eleanor," she said, her tone clipped. "A senior home. It's nice. You'll be comfortable." Eleanor's gaze flicked to the Christmas tree in the corner, its lights twinkling mockingly. She'd helped decorate it just last week, her hands shaky but determined as she hung ornaments she'd saved from Michael's childhood. Now, those same ornaments seemed to taunt her, reminders of a bond she'd thought unbreakable. "I don't understand," Eleanor whispered. "What have I done?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's not about what you've done, Mom. It's just time. You need more care than we can give. And we need our space." The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Eleanor's mind raced, searching for a way to make him see her not as a burden, but as his mother, the woman who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything for him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt a strange calm settle over her, a resolve born of years of quiet strength. She reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against a folded piece of paper she'd carried for years. The deed. The secret she'd kept, not out of malice, but out of love. She didn't mention it. Not yet. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go." Laura handed her a coat and a small suitcase, already packed. The efficiency of it stung her life reduced to a single bag. Eleanor stepped outside, the cold biting at her exposed cheeks. The door clicked shut behind her, and she stood alone in the snow, the warm glow of the house fading as she walked down the street. The senior home was a sterile place, all beige walls and fluorescent lights. Eleanor sat on the edge of a narrow bed, her suitcase unopened at her feet. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of a television in the common area. She'd been here less than a day, but it already felt like a prison. Her mind wandered back to the house on Maple Lane. It wasn't just a house site, it was a legacy. When Michael was struggling after college, drowning in debt and unable to afford a home, Eleanor and Tom had made a decision. They'd bought the house for him, putting the deed in Eleanor's name to ensure he'd always have a place to call his own. They'd never told him, wanting him to feel the pride of ownership, to believe he'd earned it. It was their gift, their sacrifice. And now, it was her secret. Eleanor unfolded the deed, her fingers tracing the faded ink. She'd kept it hidden in a lockbox, tucked away in her closet, never imagining she'd need it. But as she stared at the paper, a spark of something ignited within her, not anger, but purpose. She wasn't ready to give up. Not on her son, not on herself. The next morning, Christmas Day, Eleanor sat in the senior home's dining hall, picking at a plate of lukewarm eggs. A volunteer, a young woman with kind eyes, approached her. "You okay, Mrs. Grayson?" she asked. Eleanor managed a small smile. "I will be," she said. And she meant it. She spent the day making calls, reaching out to old friends, a lawyer she'd known for decades, and even a distant cousin who'd always had a soft spot for her. She wasn't sure what she was planning, but she knew one thing. She wasn't done fighting for her place in the world. The deed in her purse felt heavier now. Not a burden, but a key. By evening, she'd arranged to meet with her lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, the day after Christmas. He'd been surprised to hear from her, but agreed to review the deed and discuss her options. Eleanor felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by the ache in her heart. She didn't want to hurt Michael, but she needed him to understand what he'd done, what he'd thrown away. As night fell, she sat by the window, watching the snow pile up outside. The world was quiet, but her mind was loud with memories of Michael's first steps, his laughter, the way he'd looked at her with trust. She wondered where that boy had gone, and if she could find him again. The lawyer's office was a small, cluttered space downtown, its walls lined with bookshelves and faded certificates. Eleanor sat across from Mr. Caldwell, a wiry man in his 60s with a kind but no-nonsense demeanor. The deed lay on the desk between them, its edges worn but its words clear. Eleanor Grayson, sole owner of 47 Maple Lane. "You're sure about this?" Mr. Caldwell asked, adjusting his glasses. This could change everything for Michael and his family. Eleanor nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't want to take his home, Henry. I just want him to see me again, to remember who we are to each other." Mr. Caldwell leaned back, studying her. "Legally, you're within your rights. The house is yours. You could reclaim it, sell it, or transfer it to someone else entirely." But emotionally, he trailed off, his eyes softening. "This is a big step, Eleanor." She knew that. The weight of the decision pressed against her, heavy as the snow outside. But she also knew she couldn't go back to the senior home, couldn't let her life be reduced to a room she didn't choose. She needed to act, not just for herself, but for Michael to wake him up before he lost something he couldn't replace. "I want to confront him," she said finally, but not with anger. "I want him to understand." Mr. Caldwell nodded, jotting down notes. "We can draft a letter, formal but personal. It'll state your ownership and request a meeting. If he responds, you can talk it out. If he doesn't," he paused, letting the implication hang. Eleanor swallowed. "Then I'll decide what comes next." She left the office with a plan, fragile but resolute. The letter would be sent to Michael tomorrow, giving him a chance to make things right. As she walked through the snowy streets, she felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. For the first time in years, she was taking control, not just reacting to the world around her. Back at the senior home, Eleanor found herself drawn to the other residents. There was Margaret, a sharp-tongued woman in her 80s who played cards with a ruthless streak, and George, a quiet man who'd lost his wife to cancer and now spent his days sketching birds. They were strangers, but their stories echoed her own lives full of love and loss. now tucked away in a place that felt like an afterthought. One evening, over a game of gin rummy, Margaret fixed Eleanor with a piercing look. "You're not like the rest of us," she said. "You've got fire in you. What's your story?" Eleanor hesitated, then told them about Michael, the house, the deed. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. When she finished, George set down his sketchbook, his eyes thoughtful. "Sounds like your boy's forgotten what matters," he said. "But maybe he just needs a reminder." Margaret snorted. "Or a swift kick in the pants." Eleanor laughed, the sound surprising her. For the first time since Christmas Eve, she felt a spark of connection, a reminder that she wasn't alone. These people, with their own scars and stories, understood her in a way Michael hadn't in years. That night, she wrote in a journal she'd started keeping, a habit she'd picked up to make sense of her swirling thoughts. She wrote about Tom, about the day they'd signed the deed, how they'd laughed about keeping it a secret to surprise Michael one day. She wrote about her fear that she'd lost her son forever, and her hope that she could still reach him. The letter from Mr. Caldwell went out the next day, a simple envelope carrying the weight of their fractured bond. Eleanor didn't know how Michael would react to anger, guilt, or indifference, but she knew she'd done the right thing. The deed wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of everything she'd given him, everything she still wanted to give. Days passed, and no response came. Eleanor tried to keep busy, joining Margaret for card games and helping George with his sketches. But the silence from Michael gnawed at her, a wound that wouldn't heal. She began to wonder if she'd misjudged him, if the boy she'd raised was truly gone. Then, on a gray afternoon, her phone rang. It was Laura. Her voice was cold, but there was a tremor in it. "Michael got your letter," she said. "He wants to talk. Tomorrow, at the house." Eleanor's heart pounded. "I'll be there," she said. As she hung up, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. Tomorrow, she'd face her son, not as a burden, but as a woman with a story, a mother with a truth. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew she was ready. The walk to 47 Maple Lane felt longer than it should have. Eleanor's boots crunched through the snow, each step a reminder of the night she'd been cast out. The house loomed ahead, its windows glowing with the same warmth that had once welcomed her. Now, it felt like a stranger's home. Michael opened the door before she could knock. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with something she couldn't quite read: anger, shame, or both. "Come in," he said, his voice flat. The living room was unchanged, the Christmas tree still standing, though its lights were off. Laura sat on the couch, her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Eleanor took a seat across from them, her purse resting on her knees, the deed inside it a silent presence. "You sent a letter?" Michael said, holding up the envelope. "You own the house." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "Your father and I bought it for you, Michael, when you were struggling. We wanted you to have a home, a future. We never told you because we wanted you to feel it was yours." Michael's jaw clenched. "So you've been lying to me all these years?" "No," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "We gave you a gift. We didn't want you to feel indebted. But I never thought—" She paused, her eyes searching his. "I never thought you'd see me as a burden." Laura shifted uncomfortably, but Michael's gaze didn't waver. "You should have told me," he said. "You let me believe I earned this place." "You did earn it," Eleanor said. "You've made it your own. But that doesn't mean you get to erase me from it." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between them. Michael ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping. "What do you want, Mom?" "The house. Money." Eleanor's heart sank. He still didn't understand. "I want my son back," she said, her voice breaking. I want you to see me, not as some problem to solve, but as your mother, the woman who gave you everything. Laura stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You can't just waltz in here and guilt trip us. Laura, Michael said, his voice sharp. She froze, then sat back down, her lips pressed into a thin line. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm not here to take anything from you, but I need you to understand what you did. You put me out on Christmas Eve. Michael, my own son. Michael's eyes dropped to the floor, and for the first time, Eleanor saw a flicker of guilt. I didn't mean for it to happen like that, he muttered. It just got out of hand. Then make it right, Eleanor said softly. Not for the house, but for us. The conversation stretched on, tense and halting. Michael admitted he'd been overwhelmed, caught between Laura's frustrations and his own stress at work. Laura, for her part, remained defensive, insisting they'd only wanted what was best for Eleanor. But as the hours passed, something shifted. Michael began to listen, really listen, his defenses crumbling under the weight of his mother's quiet strength. By the time Eleanor left, they hadn't resolved everything, but they'd agreed to keep talking. Michael promised to visit her at the senior home, to try to rebuild what they'd lost. As she stepped back into the snow, Eleanor felt a cautious hope. The deed was still hers, but for now, she'd keep it in her purse, a reminder of the power she held and the love she still wanted to give. Back at the senior home, Eleanor found herself changing. The woman who'd arrived broken and defeated was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd found her voice. She spent her days with Margaret and George, their friendship a lifeline. She started volunteering at the home, organizing game nights and reading sessions, pouring her energy into making the place feel less like a prison. But her thoughts never strayed far from Michael. She wondered if he'd keep his promise, if he'd show up. When he did, a week later, her heart leapt. He looked different, less polished, more human. They sat in the dining hall, sharing awkward small talk at first, then stories of the past. Michael laughed, a sound Eleanor hadn't heard in years, as she recounted the time he'd tried to cook dinner as a teenager and nearly burned down the kitchen. I'm sorry, Mom, he said finally, his voice low. I didn't see you. I was so caught up in my own life. I forgot what you gave me. Eleanor reached for his hand, her eyes shining. You're here now? She said. That's a start. The weeks that followed were fragile, like the first buds of spring pushing through frozen ground. Michael's visits to the senior home became more frequent, though not without tension. Sometimes Laura came along, her presence a quiet storm. But Eleanor sensed a shift in her too, a reluctant softening, as if she were beginning to see the woman behind the burden. Eleanor threw herself into life at the home, finding purpose in small acts. She taught Margaret how to knit, her hands guiding the older woman's trembling fingers through loops of yarn. She listened to George's stories of his wife, sketching birds alongside him as he spoke of love and loss. These moments filled the holes in her heart, but they didn't erase the ache for her son. One afternoon, Michael arrived with a proposal. Mom, he said, sitting across from her in the home's small garden. I've been thinking, maybe you could move back in. Not permanently, but part-time. We could figure it out. Eleanor studied his face, searching for sincerity. She saw it. But she also saw the hesitation, the unspoken pressure from Laura. Michael, she said gently, I appreciate that. But I need to know you want me there, not just out of guilt. He nodded, his eyes downcast. I do. I've been a lousy son. I want to make it right. She believed him, but she wasn't ready to return. The senior home, for all its flaws, had become a place where she was building something new. She wasn't the same woman who'd been cast out on Christmas Eve. She had friends now. Purpose. A voice. The deed still sat in her purse. A quiet reminder of her power. But she didn't need to wield it yet. Let's take it slow, she said. Come visit. Bring Laura. Let's rebuild. Michael agreed. And over the next month, they did just that. He brought old photo albums, and they laughed over memories of family vacations and birthdays. Laura even joined in once, her guard lowering as she shared stories of her own childhood. Eleanor began to see her not as an adversary, but as a woman struggling with her own fears and insecurities. One evening, as they sat together in the senior home's lounge, Michael asked about the deed. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? All those years. Eleanor sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. Your father and I wanted you to feel independent. We thought it was the best way to love you. Maybe we were wrong. Michael shook his head. You weren't wrong. I took it for granted. The admission hung between them, a bridge over the chasm that had grown. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't born of sadness. They were relief. Hope. The slow mending of a broken bond. Outside the senior home, Eleanor's world was expanding. She started a book club, roping in Margaret, George, and a few others. They read novels about resilience and redemption, their discussions lively and full of laughter. She also began volunteering at a local community center, helping seniors navigate legal documents, wills, deeds, trusts. It was work that felt meaningful, a way to use her own experience to help others. One day, Mr. Caldwell called with an idea. Eleanor, he said, you've got a knack for this. Have you considered becoming an advocate? There's a program for seniors, helping them protect their assets, their homes. You'd be perfect. The idea lit something in her. She enrolled in a training course, her days filled with studying laws and regulations. It was daunting, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just Michael's mother or Tom's widow. She was Eleanor Grayson, a woman with something to give. As spring turned to summer, Michael's visits grew more consistent. He brought his daughter, Sophie, Eleanor's 8-year-old granddaughter, who filled the senior home with her chatter and laughter. Sophie's presence was a balm, reminding Eleanor of the joy of family, of the legacy she'd fought to preserve. One afternoon, as they walked through the community center's garden, Sophie tugged at Eleanor's hand. Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore? Eleanor knelt down, meeting her granddaughter's curious eyes. Sometimes, grown-ups need to find their own way, she said. But I'm right here, and I'll always be your grandma. Sophie hugged her tightly, and Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her. She glanced at Michael, who was watching them with a soft smile. For the first time in months, she felt like they were a family again. Summer brought warmth to the town, but for Eleanor, the real warmth was in the slow rebuilding of her relationship with Michael. They'd settled into a rhythm weekly dinners at a small diner near the senior home, where they talked about everything and nothing. Laura joined occasionally, her presence less strained now, though still cautious. Eleanor didn't push her. She knew trust took time. The deed remained in her purse, untouched but never forgotten. She'd considered transferring it to Michael, but something held her back. It wasn't about control, it was about ensuring he understood the weight of what she'd given him, what she'd lost. She wanted him to earn it, not through money, but through love. One evening, as they sat in the diner, Michael brought up the house again. Mom, he said, stirring his coffee, I've been thinking about the deed. I want to make things right. What if we put it in both our names? So it's ours. Together. Eleanor's heart skipped. It was a step. A big one. That's a generous offer, she said carefully. But it's not just about the house, Michael. It's about us. I need to know you'll never shut me out again. He met her gaze, his eyes steady, I won't. I promise. She believed him, but she wasn't ready to decide. Let me think about it, she said. I want to do this right. That night, she lay awake, weighing her options. The deed was her leverage, her proof of sacrifice, but it was also a chain binding her to a past she wasn't sure she wanted to carry forever. She thought of Tom, of the love they'd poured into that house, and of the woman she was becoming now, someone with her own purpose, her own life. The next day, she met with Mr. Caldwell again. I want to set up a trust, she said, for the house. Michael can live there, but I want protections in place for me. For Sophie. I want to make sure it's always a home for our family. Mr. Caldwell nodded, impressed. That's a wise move, Eleanor. It keeps the house in the family while giving you security. They spent hours drafting the trust, ensuring it balanced her needs with Michael's. When it was done, Eleanor felt a weight lift. The deed was no longer a secret weapon. It was a foundation for something new. Eleanor's work at the community center grew. She became a fixture there, helping seniors navigate the complexities of property law, sharing her story when it helped others feel less alone. She found herself mentoring younger volunteers, passing on the resilience she'd discovered within herself. Margaret and George cheered her on, their friendship a steady anchor. One afternoon, Sophie ran into the community center, her pigtails bouncing. Grandma, she called, holding up a drawing of a house with a big red heart on it. This is for you. Eleanor took the drawing, her throat tight. The house looked like 47 Maple Lane, but it was more than that. It was a symbol of love, of family. She hugged Sophie, her eyes meeting Michael's over her granddaughter's shoulder. He smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. Later, as they walked back to the senior home, Michael spoke quietly. I'm proud of you, Mom. What you're doing here, it's amazing. Eleanor's heart swelled. I'm proud of you too, she said, for trying. They were still healing, still learning, but they were moving forward. The trust was finalized a week later, the house secured for their family. Eleanor didn't move back in, but she visited often, each trip a step toward rebuilding what they'd nearly lost. As autumn approached, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was no longer defined by the house or the deed, but by the life she was building, one of purpose, connection, and love. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for it, her heart full of hope. Autumn painted the town in hues of gold and crimson, and Eleanor found herself embracing the season's change as a reflection of her own. The senior home, once a place of exile, had become a community. Margaret's sharp wit and George's quiet wisdom were constants, but it was the new residents, drawn to Eleanor's warmth and strength, who made her feel truly at home. She'd become their advocate, their friend, their voice. Michael's visits were now a highlight of her week. He and Sophie would arrive with small gifts, a scarf, a book, a batch of cookies, and they'd spend hours talking, laughing, sometimes crying. Laura's presence was less frequent, but when she came, there was a new respect in her eyes, a recognition of Eleanor's resilience. The trust had been a turning point, not just for the house, but for their family. It ensured 47 Maple Lane would remain a haven for them all, with Eleanor's name forever tied to its legacy. One crisp October afternoon, Michael invited Eleanor to the house for a family dinner. It was the first time she'd been back since that snowy Christmas Eve, and the sight of the familiar porch stirred a mix of emotions: pain, nostalgia, hope. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and the sound of Sophie's laughter. Laura greeted her with a hesitant smile, and Eleanor returned it, sensing the effort behind it. As they sat around the table, Michael raised a glass. To Mom, he said, his voice thick. for teaching me what family really means." Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "To all of us," she said, "for finding our way back." The meal was simple but heartfelt, each bite a reminder of the love that had always been there, buried beneath years of misunderstanding. After dinner, Sophie dragged Eleanor to the living room to show her a scrapbook she'd made, filled with photos and drawings of their family. There was a picture of Eleanor and Tom, young and laughing, and another of Michael as a boy, his grin wide and unguarded. Eleanor traced the images with her finger, her heart full. Later, as she prepared to leave, Michael walked her to the door. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did, but I'm grateful you gave me a chance to try." Eleanor took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're my son," she said. "I'll always give you a chance." As she stepped into the cool night air, the deed still in her purse, she felt a profound sense of closure. It wasn't about ownership, Anna Maria, it was about love, forgiveness, and the family they'd rebuilt. The house was theirs, not because of a piece of paper, but because of the bonds they'd fought to preserve. Back at the senior home, Eleanor's work as an advocate grew. She spoke at community events, sharing her story to inspire others to protect their legacies, their families. She became a beacon for those who felt forgotten, proving that age was no barrier to purpose. Margaret and George were her biggest cheerleaders, their friendship a testament to the power of connection. One evening, as they sat in the lounge, Margaret raised a glass of apple cider. "To Eleanor," she said, her eyes twinkling, "the woman who turned a broken heart into a revolution." Eleanor laughed, clinking her glass against Margaret's. "To all of us," she said, "for reminding me I'm never alone." As winter approached, Eleanor looked back on the year with gratitude. She'd lost her home, but she'd found herself. She'd nearly lost her son, but they'd found each other again. The deed, once a secret, was now a symbol of her strength, her love, her refusal to be cast aside. On Christmas Eve, a year after that painful night, Eleanor stood in the senior home's garden, snow falling softly around her. Michael, Laura, and Sophie were there, bundled in coats, their faces lit with smiles. They'd come to celebrate with her, to share in the community she'd built. As they sang carols under the stars, Eleanor felt a warmth that no house could contain. She was home not in a place, but in the love they'd reclaimed, in the life she'd forged. The deed was still hers, but it no longer defined her. She was Eleanor Grayson, mother, advocate, survivor, and she was enough.